Hey, everybody, it's Ryan. Thanks for downloading today's show. And just a reminder, as always, Wake Up War Chant is brought to you by our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central and Township, in the heart of College Town. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, from Tallahassee to Thomasville and from coast to Atlantic coast, it's time to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, and it's a very happy Wednesday morning, August the 23rd, to you and yours. You're currently listening to the voice of Ryan Kelly. I'm the director of digital media at warchant.com. It's a good show coming up for you today. Our own Ira Chaffel is going to join us for most of the hour. I know I told you we planned on getting some Clemson representation in here today. Unfortunately, schedule-wise, it just didn't work out, so we're going to try to get that for you later on in the week. But Ira was kind enough to stay for about a good half hour with us today, so you're going to hear us chit-chat about, well, I guess the news dump that happened at practice yesterday, news about the offensive line, news about special teams. When you're away for almost a week and you don't get access to practice and you don't get access to Coach Fisher, when you come back from that jump, well, there's a lot to dissect. So we're going to chit-chat about all of that in just a few minutes. But first of all, thanks so much for waking up with us here at 6 a.m. on 97.9 ESPN Radio and, of course, our own WTSM app, which gives you access to our show. It gives you access to the front row. It gives you access to, of course, the Jeff Cameron Show, all those different places, and, of course, streaming live as well. So thanks so much for downloading that. The TuneIn Radio app works as well if, for whatever reason, you need to use that one instead of our own. Of course, the podcast. iTunes, Podcast Republic, warchantradio.com. I already mentioned the WTSM app, YouTube. There are so many ways that you can get this show, whether it be on your desktop, whether it be in the palm of your hand, whether it be over the airwaves, in the car, if you still carry a transistor radio around, however it is. We thank you so much for doing it. Of course, if you do listen to us via podcast and your service lets you rate and subscribe, give us a good review. Give us 5 stars. It helps us out. And, of course, if you subscribe to the show, it helps us out and it helps you out. It gives you a brand spanking new episode right there, ready to roll every single day. You don't have to go looking for us. We're right there. We can't do this without our friends at For the Table, Madison Social, Central, and Township, all there in the heart of College Town. And finally, to talk back to the show, radio@warchant.com. There's your email address. And @WakeUpWarChant is your Twitter account. Send your questions in. We're going to have another mailbag on Friday, so brace yourself for that. There's going to be plenty of content to get to there just because, well, this went from a week where there wasn't really a lot to talk about outside of AP polls and preseason All-Americans and all that, and Jimbo Fisher kind of blew that up yesterday. Little minor Matthew Thomas update, I guess you could say. Not a whole lot to report other than that he says he's coming back soon. And Ira talked about this last night when we recorded his interview, and I tend to agree with him. Jimbo Fisher saying something, the fact that he is saying he's optimistic, the fact that he's even bringing this up and is continuing to look at this through the prism of, hey, it's something outside of a quote-unquote injury. There's something going on, but we're optimistic. The fact that they're willing to address it and they're not just trying to downplay it or brush it away, I think is a good thing. I think you kind of read between the lines there that, well, they tend to think that they're going to have this guy back. Of course, you lose 2 offensive linemen for the year. We figured Bavion Johnson's injury was going to be something that was either going to sideline him for a long time or for the season, and now he's gone. So you're down another guy at center. Andrew Biselli's a little banged up, so you're down him at center for the moment. You haven't lost him for the year, of course. And then, on top of all that, you have Corey Martinez going. But like I said, there's already another absence for the year on that offensive line. And that just so happens to be a backup offensive tackle, and Juwan Williams. Of course, you feel a little bit more comfortable about your situation at tackle than you do at center. But it's most certainly Alec Eberle's job now. There's really no doubt about it. You're going to see how that depth gets tested now. You brought in so many guys, you brought in so many bodies, you brought in so many talented people in that highly touted recruiting class 2 years ago. Let's see just how much that depth holds up, because that's why you recruit so many guys. That's why you bring in so many guys. And we talked about that a lot when that class got signed, that Florida State didn't seem to have a ton of scholarship guys compared to some of the other big, ugly teams that loved their offensive line and loved their fronts. And then in the blink of an eye, after one recruiting class, Florida State went from having, low teens to high teens in terms of actual offensive linemen on the team. So we're going to see just how much that depth is going to work out. We're going to see just how much it's going to pan out because it's year 2 and year 3 for a lot of these guys outside of a couple who are now trying to slide into places. But, it's year 3 for Alec Eberle. It's time. It's got to see what he can do. Rick Leonard, it's year 2 for you. Got to see what can happen there. Of course, interesting to see Derek Kelly. We're not going to know until he takes the field. But overall, you like what you got there. And, of course, Landon Dickerson, if he is anything like he was last year and he takes a step forward, you feel really comfortable about his year 2. On warchant.com right now, the front page, you should read this story because it is very, very good. I know that's a very prototypical call to action, but I was curious to read it, and, well, I was curious to talk with Ira about it last night. Quarterback James Blackman, true freshman, the guy that everybody kind of thought was going to be quarterback number 4, kind of the afterthought. Hockman fits the system better. He's more of a prototypical pro-style quarterback. He's the guy who will probably, if either the two's going to push JJ for that number 2 spot, it's going to be him. Gene Williams told you when we did our Q&A on Friday, he's heard nothing but good things about James Blackman. Of course, Ira Schafel, you're going to hear that in a bit, just said that he's heard nothing but good things about James Blackman. Jimbo Fisher's been praising James Blackman a lot. And so now this guy, who ends up being a 4-star recruit, wasn't that when you originally started going after him, but a dude who was considered a project that has a lot of athleticism and a lot of upside. If you can just teach him your system, get him well, maybe put a little bit more meat on his bones because he's tall, but you can tell that he's not a third-year college guy, I guess you could say. Maybe he'll be ready by his 3rd year. Maybe he can make a contribution in year 2. This is a guy who people think can be the number 2 quarterback at Florida State. And that in and of itself, well, you tip your cap to the kid. Jimbo Fisher even said in a quote, he's doing a really good job. Very intelligent guy. A lot of poise, a lot of presence, a lot of command, and he can throw the football. And you most certainly saw that if you were out at that open practice. And just a little bit of time we get to see them. Of course, quarterbacks don't go into a whole lot of situational stuff. Maybe a couple route drills with wide receivers and tight ends. But even when he's just tossing the ball around trying to get loose, it's a pretty ball. It's a really, really pretty ball. Like I said, maybe he needs to get a little bit more meat on his bones. He's 6'5", but 185 at that. So maybe a little bit more on that frame, but they're impressed with what he can do. And to know that you have options at quarterback because you have the depth, but do you have the quality depth? J.J. Cosentino kind of is what he is at this point. That's no shot at the guy. Seems like an okay dude. But you know what you have there. And now you have to know what you have in this. And now you have to know what you have in this second coming of. And now you have to know what you have in this new wind, this new breed of quarterbacks coming in at Florida State, and to know that they have a guy that they feel very, very comfortable with this early is a good sign. Of course, we're going to talk about all of that with Ira Schafel in just a minute, but first of all, we got to get you caught up in all the things that's been going on in the world of sports, especially what happened in Major League Baseball last night. This, ladies and gentlemen, is While You Were Sleeping.
Hello. Good morning.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake me up! Good morning. Good morning.
What happened last night?
You're welcome, Yankee fans. I know you've been going through a little bit of a slump, but of course, if you're going through a slump, you may as well play us. The Detroit Tigers fall at home to the New York Yankees last night, 13-4, in a game that really was not all that close, honestly. The Dodgers end up beating the Buccos at PNC 8-5. The Miami Marlins all over the Philadelphia Phillies 12-8. The Oakland Athletics beat the Baltimore Orioles in Camden Yards 6-4. Rays get a win at home over the Blue Jays 6-5. Cubbies go to the Cincinnati Reds and win 13-9. Arizona over New York, the Metropolitans that is, at Citi Field 7-4. Boston victorious over the Indians 9-1. Atlanta bounces back from their loss the night before to the Seattle Mariners with a 4-0 victory. It's Miami in a doubleheader, taking another game from the Philadelphia Phillies 7-4. Doubleheader against the Phillies. If you're going to play two, you may as well play arguably the worst team in baseball. 4-3, that's the Washington Nationals over the Houston Astros. 4-1, that's the Minnesota Twins over the Chicago White Sox. 12-4, the Padres go on the road to Busch Stadium and beat the St. Louis Cardinals. Pretty impressive win. 3-2, the Kansas City Royals defeat the Colorado Rockies in KC. And finally, it's the Milwaukee Brewers taking a game away from the San Francisco Giants 4-3. When we come back, it's Ira Schoffel talking about Florida State football and, well, all the stuff building up to Florida State, Alabama. On the other end, it's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio. Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table, Madison Social Central Allen Township, in the heart of College Town. Practice info galore. There was I guess you could call it what do they call it when someone just drops something like on a Friday afternoon, a news dump? I guess that's about what you could consider Jimbo Fisher's press conference to a certain extent yesterday. And our own Ira Schoffel, the managing editor of warchant.com, was there. Ira, is it fair to call yesterday's presser a news dump?
It had that effect. I don't know if that was the intention. I think it was a combination of a couple things. One was because of some circumstances between the football team's schedule changing a little bit over the weekend, we hadn't had the opportunity to talk to Jimbo Fisher or any of the players or anything since last Thursday, and several things had kind of transpired since then. So this was our first chance Tuesday afternoon to kind of get back out there to practice, talk to Jimbo. So we had a lot of catching up to do, and there were some things that we expected, and there were some other things that kind of came out of the blue a little bit.
All right, I'll start straight with Matthew Thomas because that's all the internet really seems to want to know about these days. And really no change in Jimbo Fisher's speak, that he seems to think he's going to be back soon. No other real update than that. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, again, I think that's one of those where, I don't think fans want to hear this, but I think no news is good news. Again, this has gone on now for 2 weeks. At the time, really after the first few days, Jimbo said, early last week that he expected to be back. And he thinks he's going to be back in camp. He thinks he's going to be back for this season. And to me, every time we talk to him and he doesn't say, okay, we were wrong, he's not going to be available, I think is a good thing for Florida State. Now, ideally, he would be back already. Ideally, he'd be practicing. I think today, Jimbo said they were going to start installing their game plan stuff for the Alabama game. So clearly they want him on the field, and I think they think he's going to get on the field. Jimbo just continued to say we think he's going to get back, and again, until he says otherwise, I think you have to see that as somewhat of a positive. It's better than him saying we're not going to get him. So we'll see. I think. From what we hear, what we heard independently was that it looks promising that Matthew Thomas will be able to play. But again, I think the issue now at this point with, 10 or 11 games till the game is, how ready would he be and when's he actually going to get back on the field?
Offensive line-wise, we knew that there was some news around Bavion Johnson. We knew that he had surgery, and we knew it was something that, it sidelined Derwin James pretty much for the whole year, and it looks like it's going to sideline Bavion for the whole year as well. Jimbo Fisher announcing that he's out for the season.
Yeah, and, Bavion Johnson was a backup center. I think some people came into the summer and into the preseason camp hoping that he might compete for the starting job. He was the number one center coming out of high school a year ago, and Alec Eberle last year as a starter had his issues. So I think there were a lot of fans certainly that thought maybe Bavion Johnson could make a run for the starting job. It hadn't seemed to materialize for the first few weeks. It turns out, from talking to Jimbo Fisher, it sounds like Bavion had this knee problem kind of going back way earlier in the off season, and from what we understand, it kind of did a little. I think he said it was non-football related injury. One of Bavion's family members posted on our message boards, and he said it was actually a weight room incident or heard it a little bit in the weight room, and it just kind of kept nagging. I think they did some checking into it, didn't look that bad. They finally went back in early last week and discovered there was a tear. So he had surgery and he's going to be out for the year. As you said, we knew that. That's obviously concerning because of depth. I mean, Alec Eberle is going to be the starter. Corey Martinez is going to be the top backup for now. Andrew Baselli, who's the other center, has not been practicing. Kind of been in and out of the lineup. Jimbo just described as he's been banged up. So he hasn't been available. So right now they have two really full-time centers. And then, I asked him what would happen if something happened there. And he said, they've got some guards that they've, worked on snapping with on the side that they could use in an emergency situation. But that situation is not ideal, just the lack of depth. And then, again, the kind of the unexpected news, Jimbo also told us that Juwan Williams, who is a redshirt freshman offensive tackle that we thought was going to be competing for one of the starting jobs, he's actually undergone shoulder surgery and he's out for the year. So that's two offensive linemen, neither of which was expected to start. One was a second teamer, one was probably a third teamer, who are now out for the season. And again, these aren't the kind of injuries that necessarily are going to affect your season right off the bat, but obviously it's not a good thing to lose depth.
Well, this is why you ended up signing so many guys, right? This is why you brought in that class that you brought in just a year ago, right? This is a situation you don't want, but early on, Florida State at one of its most crucial positions is going to get tested, and now we're really going to see just how much that depth has really, I guess, come into play, how much it's developed, and if it's ready to go against the number one team in the country.
Yeah, and I think the offensive tackle situation probably is not really too much affected. I mean, I think if you look at the top offensive tackles that they have, looks like Derek Kelly, again, Jimbo said Derek Kelly seems to be settling in at that left tackle position. It seems like the starting offensive line is pretty well set. I mean, Jimbo wouldn't confirm that necessarily, except to say that he feels like the offensive line has been coming around. I think he used the phrase, he's been pleased with the offensive line this preseason. He said they played pretty well in the scrimmage Sunday night. So it looks like, right now, just based on the last week or two of practice, it looks like Derek Kelly would be at left tackle. Landon Dickerson would be at left guard. Alec Eberle at center. Cole Minshew at right guard, and then Rick Leonard at right tackle. And that's that's a decent amount of experience. So if those guys stay healthy and those guys perform well, they're in pretty good shape. They've also got some depth at tackle with Josh Ball, who's backing up one of the tackle spots, and I think Brock Rubel's been working at guard, but he's started at tackle before. Abdul Bello is another guy that was highly regarded coming out of high school a couple of years ago. He's working as a backup tackle. Ethan Frith has worked at tackle. I mean, they've got a lot of guys. So I think that position is not that big of a deal. The center one's disconcerting because, again, Alec Eberle is coming off a hip surgery. He seems fine and he's doing well. But, the guy behind him right now, Corey Martinez, has kind of dealt with some injuries throughout his career. So that situation's a little tenuous. If Andrew Baselli could get back, a redshirt freshman who has a lot of talent. Obviously, his dad was a Pro Bowler with the Jaguars. If he could get back in the mix, I think that would make them feel a lot better.
Ryan Izzo not at practice today. Jimbo said don't worry about it. Outside of that, Jimbo Fisher with a lot of good things to say about James Blackman, and I think that's pretty interesting, especially considering Gene told us on Friday when he came in, joined us for Q&A, that he'd heard nothing but positive things about him as well. Is there any chance that he ends up being the number 2? Not right away, not game one. I think it's pretty clear that JJ is going to be that guy, but is there any chance Jimbo doesn't redshirt this guy?
Oh, I think there's a real chance, and I've got a story up on War Chant this morning about that, and I think there wasn't, really there was not supposed to be any drama about that quarterback position this season. It seemed all pretty cut and dry. You get DeAndre as a returning starter, JJ is a fourth-year junior as your backup. Bailey Hockman enrolled early, so it stood to reason that he would be the number 3 guy. maybe kind of pushing a little bit for number 2, but if one of those freshmen was not going to redshirt, you figured it would be Bailey Hockman, who got here in January. But James Blackman has really just kind of shaken things up. He's we saw him at the open practice. He throws a beautiful ball. Really just has a ton of talent, can make all the throws. The question you had was, how quickly could he learn the offense? And Jimbo said last night that he's really learned the offense exceptionally well. He's poised. He knows his reads. He makes good decisions. And he didn't dispel the notion that he could be in the competition for the number 2 job. Now, granted, I think I agree with you. If they got in a situation where they needed somebody to just manage the game against Alabama, say they got a lead, but then DeAndre got shaken up or something happened where he had to leave the game, I would think you'd go with J.J. Cosentino, who's at least played in big games before. But, if they need somebody to go out and make plays and win a game, I think James Blackman might be his name might be in the mix. The other thing that's kind of helped his opportunity here is Bailey Hockman apparently banged up his shoulder the other day and wasn't able to participate in the scrimmage. I think that opened the door a little bit for James Blackman. It sounds like Blackman kind of kicked his way through.
I'll keep up my tradition of asking an unhealthy amount of special teams questions. Tavares McFadden, starting punt returner. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that was one of those things that really kind of came out of the blue about a week or two ago. We were at practice, and, I don't think we saw Tavares McFadden really work much as a return guy last season, even at practice, from what I recall. I know he did return kicks and I believe punts also in high school. But a lot of guys do. Most of these guys do. If you're an athlete that's going to play, skill position on offense or defense in college, at this level, you probably were your top return guy in high school also because you're so much better athlete than everybody else. And, in the spring, I don't remember him working much there, and early in the preseason. And then all of a sudden, one day we were out there, and it seemed like he took every rep as a punt returner. And Jimbo said at the time he loved him as a punt returner. And we know they haven't been thrilled with what they have. I mean, obviously, Naquan Murray, they tried to give a lot of opportunities to last year. He made a lot of poor decisions about when to field a punt, when to let it go, muffed on occasion. And so, I think that was an open position. And Jimbo just he raved about Tavares McFadden again yesterday. So, he doesn't look like a typical punt returner, but, Jimbo seems to be super high on him.
Lots of, I guess you could say, athletes you don't expect as special teamers guys, including, of course, Derwin James and Keith Gavin, once again, still seem to be the starting kick returners for Florida State. Jimbo Fisher confirmed that yesterday. I think it's interesting to see, because we've talked about it here, it's been written about. It's no real surprise. I'm not giving you, some fresh new take when I say special teams have to be better with Florida State. There's no doubt about it. And so to see such an unconventional approach at kick return and at punt return, I think is Jimbo Fisher saying, I'm going to do what it takes to address this.
Yeah, and that's really, kind of been Jimbo's MO. That's why last year was so bizarre. Jimbo really puts a lot into special teams. A lot of coaches will pay lip service to special teams, but they don't want to put their best players out there. If people have been paying attention, they know that on a kickoff coverage team, it is almost always their best linebackers and DBs and maybe a receiver in there as well. But it's almost all of the top linebackers and DBs on the return teams. I mean, whether it was Greg Reed or Rashad Green or if it was Kenny Shaw or really any of his top players, he's never hesitated to make them return men, or Jalen Ramsey. And then, I think the idea that it's Derwin James and Keith Gavin, I think it shows that, it's potentially, it's your best player on defense, and it could end up being your number one wide receiver. I mean, Keith Gavin has had a sensational preseason and an entire offseason. So, it shows Jimbo's commitment to do better. And it also, shows a little bit of a change in philosophy to get away from some of these kind of smaller return guys who seem to go down easier and go with some bigger guys. Derwin James, Keith Gavin, and Tavares McFadden are three large guys. Tavares isn't as thick as the other two, but he's not he's not a small guy by any stretch of the imagination. I think he wants some more size in the return game because he thinks that they're better off with ball control because they don't get shaken up as easily. And obviously, you wouldn't think they'd go down as easily as we saw with Gavin's return in the Orange Bowl.
Jimbo Fisher, going back to the dog days of fall camp, and we've talked about this a couple times over the last couple days, this is that point where you kind of get restless, you kind of grow weary. He's been overwhelmingly positive about all this. And I guess it's kind of a two-part question. First of all, are you surprised to hear that the guys came out decently positive out of the dog days of camp? And second of all, are you just surprised at how positive Jimbo Fisher's been at this fall camp period?
I wouldn't say surprised with either one. We did the last time again we talked to Jimbo was last week, and he was a little bit concerned about how they were going to handle that next 4 or 5 days because really the newness of camp had worn off. It was still going to be a little while before they got into the Alabama game, and he said there were he admitted there was a day or so that. You could see guys dragging a little bit, and he said the coaches really challenged them, and they responded well, and then had a really good scrimmage Sunday. He seemed pretty pleased with the scrimmage Sunday, and to be honest, they're kind of over the hump. I think at this point, when you look at, they've already had over 3 weeks of camp in. Today they're going to start installing, their game plan for Alabama. Well, now it's go time. We spoke to Auden Tate, one of the wide receivers, yesterday, and he said, look, we're dying to get to this point where we can start preparing for a real game. They know how important the preparation is before that and all the things they need to do in terms of technique and fundamentals. They understand that was important, but they've been chomping at the bit to actually get to this point. And I think now you get to this point, it's almost smooth sailing because attention will come easy this week because they want to know everything they can find out about Alabama. They want to learn the game plan. They want to prepare for that game. So, I think they're home free now in terms of that stuff. I don't think you have to worry about the dog days or any of that anymore. And, and again, I think that it would have been disconcerting if Jimbo came out of this camp. I think when we talked at the beginning of camp about would Jimbo have to push different buttons and would he have to have the bad day and the good day and kind of do all the things, coaches sometimes do to kind of motivate their players. And I think I said at the time, with as many seniors as they have, as many returning starters they have, and with a team with as much on the line as they have, it would have been a bad sign if he was having to play head games throughout camp because these guys should know what's on the line. And it seems like they do. It seems like they realize that. And I think you can see that in Jimbo's demeanor. People watch the press conference from yesterday on our site. They can get a feel for it. He seems to be in a really good place.
And I think you can especially see that compared to where he kind of was this time last year.
Yeah, there were definitely times last year where he was frustrated with his team and felt like he was having to coach effort. And the guys didn't take it seriously. I remember a couple of times where we talked to, players coming off the field. And, I remember the one time we talked to Dalvin Cook and said, hey, Jimbo seemed pretty frustrated with practice. And Dalvin Cook said, I was too. He's not the only one. We all were. And again, we saw some the lack of maturity of that team play out during the season. I think the fact that, he's been pretty happy with it overall this preseason, should again be another positive sign going into the year.
Ira, I know we've gone a little bit long, but I feel like I still wanted to ask you about the polls, wanted to ask you about a couple things that have come out. You mind hanging on the line with me for another segment?
Yeah, of course.
All right, man. More with Ira Schoffel after this. On the other end, it's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio.
Yes, Florida State just landed a 5-star commitment.
I don't see that anywhere online. How did you get that news so fast?
I'm on the new warchant.com app. I get news updates and scores pushed to my phone instantly.
How much does it cost?
It's free. Just go to iTunes or the Google Play Store, type in War Chant, and install it on your phone. That's it.
A free app that keeps me constantly up to date on Florida State sports and recruiting? Wow, that makes it incredibly easy to follow my Seminoles and never miss out.
With the app, you'll also get quick access to all the stories and features on War Chant, including the ever-popular message boards that feature thousands of fans talking about the Noles.
WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole source.
Welcome back to Wake Up War Chant 97.9 ESPN Radio, brought to you by your friends at For the Table. Madison Social, Central Township, all there in the heart of College Town. Ira Schaffel's still on the phone line. And Ira, I know what an NBA guy you are. I didn't get to ask you when we first came on. Are the Celtics crazy?
I don't know, man. That's a good question. I think getting a guy like Kyrie's a big deal. But this has been an eventful offseason, no question about it.
And I mean, that's the heart and soul of their team they just traded away.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's some interesting decisions. I'm curious about that one. I also am curious to see what's going to happen with Cleveland now, because the talk of Dwayne Wade joining back up with LeBron as well. It's not like the old days, man, where teams would kind of stand pat. It seems like it's musical chairs.
Isn't it amazing how Dwayne Wade has kind of turned into... Remember Marcy from the Peanuts, the girl that would just follow Peppermint Patty around? That's what I feel like Dwayne Wade's turned into. And I know I'm going to have some angry Heat fans for saying that, but he just wants to follow LeBron.
It's not a bad guy to follow.
No.
But it's funny, man. Like as much as Kyrie seemed to hate playing with LeBron, it's interesting that Dwayne really seemed to enjoy it. And, they built it seemed like a much closer, friendship. I wonder if it's because it seemed like more like a partnership. It seemed like Kyrie kind of had to get pushed aside when LeBron came in, whereas when the big three went to Miami, it seemed like a little bit more of a partnership, at least certainly with Wade and LeBron.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because when Kyrie gets drafted, and I know we got to move on right after this, but Kyrie gets drafted, and he's basically told, you're going to be the guy. And when you're told you're Batman, and then someone turns you into Robin, it just kind of, I can only imagine what that does to you mentally when you're the guy who's going to be the face of the post-LeBron Cavs, but instead you are the second or third face of the second LeBron Cavs. I can only imagine how frustrating that is.
Yeah, and I think you'd be curious. I'd be curious to see how, if this does, if the LeBron Dwayne Wade reunion happens, what the dynamics would be there now. Because clearly, Dwayne Wade at this point in his career would be clearly, if not a second fiddle, maybe a third fiddle. But at the same time, he may be more ready to accept that role at this point in his career, because he knows he's only got a limited amount of time left.
Switching gears, didn't get a chance to ask you about the AP poll earlier in the week. Florida State at 3. If you had a vote, Ira, is that where you'd put them?
I don't know, man. I haven't spent a ton of time looking at that. I have done. I've been an AP voter in the past, and I've kind of spent a lot of time really researching all of that. It seems about right. I kind of thought they might end up at number 2. But they're an interesting team, because I think on paper, Phil Steele was kind of one of the first guys who really made a big deal about returning starters and returning Letterman, and kind of how important that is in college football. And I think, Florida State's pretty high up there nationally in terms of returning starters, returning Letterman. You could make a case that they're going to do, and you got a quarterback back. You can make a case, I think, that they, I guess they had 4 first-place votes. So, you could make a case that they should be 1 or 2. 3 seems probably about right, but I think I could have made a case for them maybe at number 2.
I'm with you there, but I will say this. I'm a little shocked and I said this on the show to open it yesterday, I am a little shocked they weren't number 2 just because I thought that folks were going to want this game to be 1 versus 2 so bad. They were going to fabricate it even if folks and the voters didn't believe that Florida State was the number 2 team. So I'll say this, if voters really thought Ohio State was better, I'm happy that's how the poll shook out.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think the Florida State's a tough team because, on the one hand, like I said, I think you could definitely make a case that they could be number 2. On the flip side, everybody knows that there's concerns about the offensive line. And if you look at the teams that have great seasons, usually it's teams that have really good offensive lines. And, we'll see if that group turns out to be really solid. I think everything else is in place for them to have a huge year. But if that becomes their Achilles heel, then, all bets are off. And so from that standpoint, I guess the uncertainty there, leaves that window open as well.
You surprised Clemson with as much as they lost still in the top 5, or you think 5's about right?
I'm not surprised. I mean, to me, Clemson, again, I think, they've recruited so well. I think, it's not surprising to me that they start off that high. I wouldn't be surprised to see Clemson lose a couple games this year, 2 or 3 games this year, just because I think, I just look at what Florida State went through losing Deshaun Watson. I just think that is such a big Florida State losing Jameis Winston. Now Clemson's going through it with losing Deshaun Watson. I think that you're not just losing your starting quarterback, you're losing a guy who was maybe the best quarterback in your school history, certainly most decorated quarterback in your school history. I think they're going to be in for a little bit of a rude awakening, and just like Florida State was, I think, when Jameis left.
I think it's all a matter. If Clemson can come out of this, to me, with a 10-11 win season, you just kind of tip your cap, and then if you're anybody outside of them, you get a little bit worried about what they could be next year.
Yeah, and see, that's why I don't expect that to happen, because I just think, it's not like they run a plug-and-play offensive system necessarily. It's not like anybody can have success running that offense. It's not like, it's not like they've proven it before. That they could just do it with whoever, a quarterback. And if you remember, before Deshaun Watson took over the starting job, that team was underperforming early that season. I just think that, again, I have a feeling they're going to step back. But ironically, though, I still think Florida State's going to have a really hard time winning up there just because they traditionally struggle up at Clemson. And I think Clemson, if Clemson has a loss or two at that point, now all of a sudden that becomes, their Super Bowl to knock off Florida State.
Finally, Ira, before I let you run, I did want to ask you about something. I got a nice little chuckle out of one of the things ESPN did yesterday. ESPN Stats and Info compiled a list that through their metrics, through success versus program power versus rivalry dominance, coaching stability, the recruiting trends, the revenue growth, and just kind of the buzz on social media and how people are received in the public eye, the best to worst in terms of fan base happiness in college football. And Florida State found themselves at number 2 overall, Ohio State number 1, Alabama number 3, Louisville 4, K-State number 5. I'll be honest with you, I'm not surprised Florida State's 2. I'm maybe a little surprised Ohio State's number 1. But Louisville kind of surprises me because most Louisville fans I know are just still mad about the end of that season. But overall, I don't think you can complain with that top 5, saying that, well, Kansas State, I mean, Bill Snyder's the miracle maker. Nick Saban is Nick Saban. Urban Meyer's Urban Meyer. Jimbo Fisher's Jimbo Fisher. Overall, though, the one thing that held Florida State back, you'll never guess, out of a 1 out of 100 scale, revenue growth was at a 2 out of 100.
That's not a real positive sign. I think that's, look, and that's ultimately, I think, what's going to determine the strength of these conferences and the strength of really more so the conferences overall. And, everybody got so excited about what the ACC did last year, rightly so. You win the national title, you have the Heisman Trophy winner, you win the Orange Bowl, really had great success head-to-head with the SEC. But in terms of longevity, in terms of, maintaining that kind of success, I mean, I think that's when you start looking at the dollar figures and the fact that the ACC doesn't bring in the kind of money that these other conferences bring in. Now we'll see. Maybe that changes with the ACC network. I'm a little skeptical. So I think that's fair to bring that up. I don't know if I'd say it's as dire as they make it sound, but yeah, I mean, I think overall, I think that seems legit. What's interesting about that is, you see just the emphasis on head coaches. Obviously all those head coaches are probably among the best head coaches in those schools' histories. But what's ironic is that you still don't see Jimbo usually that highly thought of on coaching lists. If you see, sometimes you're starting to see him in the top 5 or 10 nationally, but on some others you're still seeing him a little bit further down. And it's good to see them give that credit to Jimbo as a head coach.
Little surprised to see Miami so high. Miami just missed the top 15 at number 16, and it's because, it's not because of rivalry dominance, which is a 48. And I'm a little surprised it's not Twitter buzz, because Twitter buzz is only at 21. I mean, when your entire fan base lives on the internet, Ira, you would hope they're saying nice things about you.
Yeah, again, I'm not too surprised that they're up where they are, because it does seem like a lot of people are believing. It seems like a lot of people are believing, especially outside of, even outside the ACC. I just think there's this perception now that Mark Richt has righted the ship, and Miami's, going to become this juggernaut. We'll see. I'm again a little skeptical. Not that. Not skeptical of Mark Richt. I'm just a little skeptical of how quickly that turnaround is going to happen. I don't know that they're going to be what they thought this year. And the problem with, the overall problem with putting them that high is just, you're talking about a fan base, as you said, that's so marginal compared to the traditional powers, across the country.
I forgot. Did you pick Miami to win the Coastal?
I did not. Who
did you put, if you don't mind me asking?
I have to think back to, I'm guessing I probably picked Virginia Tech. I'm not 100% sure. But I don't think I picked Miami. I'm not sold, especially with a new quarterback. If Kaya had stayed, I might have. Not that I was a huge Kaya fan. But again, I just look at them as a team that's kind of starting over a little bit with quarterback. And
especially now that, N'Kosi Perry was thought to be the guy, and they're rolling with the other. I don't even know the other kid's name, Ira.
Malik Rozier, I believe.
Well, there it is. So we'll find out, Canes fans. We'll find out soon enough. Anyway, Ira, we're all out of time, man, but thanks so much for joining us. I always appreciate you coming on, chit-chatting.
Okay, take care, Ron.
All right, folks, we're putting a ball on it right after this. It's Wake Up War Chant on 97.9 ESPN Radio. To close Wake Up War Chant and put a bow on it here on 97.9 ESPN Radio, I offer you a act of savagery that is just, college football rivalries are the best, aren't they? So, Jeff Heuerman of the Denver Broncos, he had some fun with one of the rookies. Jake Butt, of course, the tight end from the University of Michigan, ended up getting hurt right before that Orange Bowl game against FSU. But, of course, a guy who played all 4 years, was a great tight end for Michigan. He got himself a little haircut from former Buckeye Jeff Heuerman, who may or may not have shaved the block O into the back of his head and put an 0-4 on the side of his head to signify, of course, his record against the Buckeyes for the last 4 years. That's brutal. That's just, there comes a time where it's just mean, folks, and that's just mean. That ain't right, even though I'll still argue Michigan should have won last year. That's all I got to say about that. This is a pretty good weekend. Let me just say that. This is kind of your appetizer weekend. You get, if you're a fighting fan, you get Mayweather and McGregor, and, of course, you also get FAMU is in action this Saturday. I didn't even realize that till this week, that the Rattlers start their season a week early. So that's what I'll be watching on Saturday. I don't know about you guys, We're all out of time, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks to Ira for joining us. Mike and Mike's up next, 97.9 ESPN Radio.
WarChant.com is the ultimate inside source for FSU football and recruiting. And now you can get in on the action for free for an entire month. WarChant.com is offering a risk-free 30-day trial subscription. Get full access to the #1 website covering the Seminoles just by entering the promo code WarChant30. That's WarChant30. Sign up and get in on the world's most active FSU message boards. Receive breaking news, stories from our award-winning staff, plus get exclusive interviews and videos. Just enter the promo code WarChant30. WarChant.com, your ultimate Seminole sports source.
Hey, thanks for downloading today's show. If you haven't already, why don't you rate and subscribe us? We certainly do appreciate it, and of course, we appreciate you listening anyway, so just go ahead and click that right there. You know you want to. Come on. Come on. Thanks again for letting us do the show. We love giving you all the football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, all year round. Not just football season, not just spring practice, but hopefully giving you the freshest and newest FSU content every day. Thanks, guys.